In his latest article published on CoinDesk.com, Helium co-founder and Borderless Capital lead partner Sean Carey says the potential of DePIN is bound only by our creativity. And while it's still early days for decentralized physical networks, he remains highly optimistic that progress will be made. Sean, thank you for sitting down with me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
I'm really excited that people get to read this article. You know, DePIN has become, for lack of a better word, a buzzword this year. And so I want to start this interview by just laying the foundation for anyone who's new to DePIN, who's clicking on this video to watch this interview. How do you define decentralized physical infrastructure?
Yeah, it's a great question. So decentralized physical infrastructure can be in my opinion, can be classified in two ways. We'll start with the first way. The most common way is a bespoke DePIN network. If you've ever seen products like HiveMapper or Demo or Helium, they are bespoke networks. There's a piece of custom hardware that you plug in. It reports information back to some type of Oracle or on-chain application, and you're rewarded for that information. And it all starts with it could be a device this big or a device this big. But the idea is it's a custom piece of hardware that you get rewarded for operating. And there are some consumers out there that are interested in the data, and they use that data, and you're essentially pushing that information back into an ecosystem. The other concept is something that we call commodity DePIN. And commodity DePIN is something that could run on something as simple as your telephone, right? And the reason why commodity has come to light recently is because there are networks out there, and I'll use like Uprock and Grass, for instance, where they have applications and where some of them are getting millions of users. I would guess between Grass, Uprock, and Silencio, they have a phone applications that support several million users at this point. And it's a custom application, but it's also decentralized physical infrastructure. It just uses the telephone. Hope that makes sense. I'm going to try to keep it and distill it so it's not too technical. But really the main concept is it's a piece of technology that you operate and you contribute information to a network, and you're rewarded for it. And TLDR.
All right, John, I want to talk about your journey. I know it's sometimes easier for people to understand when we're talking about these like highly technical things when we hear about people's own personal journeys. And you start your article with an anecdote about your grandfather who had a watch that would tell him the time with the press of a button. You say that kind of sparked your interest and led to your journey in DePIN. Tell me a little bit more about what you meant there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my grandfather was blind. And in the 1980s, the world was not very technologically advanced. And this was the actual device right here. When I found out I was writing this article and speaking with you all, I actually was able to hunt it down and find one on eBay. And let me see if I can make it work. Let's see if you hear it. It's super quiet.
I heard it.
Yeah. And so really the concept sparked a lot of interest for me as a kid, because something like that, a thing on your wrist talking, it just felt so futuristic. And it really started my thinking about technology at a young age, to where, going into my birthdays and Christmas gifts, I spent a lot of time taking them apart instead of using them, because most of the time I couldn't get them working again after I took them apart. And I think, going in after about 15 years of engineering, I had this moment where I wanted to start doing something different. And I wanted to start doing things that helped other people. I had a little bit of money, not a whole lot, and I just quit my job. And from there, I started thinking about building devices to help people that are visually impaired. And this ended up stemming from my work into what became Helium. And Sean Fanning, who was also a co-founder, he wanted to create a device because he played his drums at home and the neighbors were calling the police, and he wanted something to track his decibels outside of the house. And Amir Halim, he's a race car driver, and he's always doing all sorts of these instrumentation things. And he was interested in these wireless networks for those sorts of things. And the three of us formed this company and started working on things. And over a decade later now, there two terms have been created. Internet of Things was created after we started Helium, and also DePIN was created after we started Helium. And so it's pretty cool if you think about our journey from that perspective. Is we've gone through multiple acronyms and concepts at this point, and really, what it boils down to is I believe what I said in the article is scratching your own itch. And for me, that's always been the most fun, is when I'm working on something that I don't know how to solve, and that's what's interesting to me.
You mentioned two terms there, the Internet of Things and DePIN, and these are terms for concepts that have been around long before the terms. Talk to me about having those terms, having a way to talk about what you're doing. How does that help you progress in innovation and raising funds and getting customers? Does it even help you? Like, what's the significance of having these terms attached to what you're doing?
Absolutely. So, I mean, if you think of Internet of Things, right, and you reverse it, and I think I talked about a decade ago, there's a talk of me saying the same thing. Really, Internet of Things is getting things to the internet, right? And really all that means is, a super small device being able to communicate or send information back to the internet, where the information can then be utilized. A multi-billion-dollar industry was sparked when the term Internet of Things was created. So if you look at huge companies like Microsoft, Google, IBM, Amazon, they all have Internet of Things subsections and subsectors in their businesses. Moving towards DePIN, where Sami from Sanasie was kind of the father of the term DePIN, and thinking about what DePIN is, it's a even broader concept than Internet of Things, right? It's more about decentralizing. Objects could be telephones, it could be servers with GPUs on them, it could be an IoT device, but it's a much larger explanation of what this is. And of course, if you look at it from an investor point of view, it's a totally appealing concept for investors, and it's also something that non-technical investors can wrap their minds around. And I think that's why this terminology is helpful. And it also creates critical mass when it comes to investing in these concepts, because you can take something like DePIN and you could say, DePIN is a tangible thing. And when you look at it as part of crypto or as part of, decentralized finance, there's always some tangible device or hardware or software that is at the end of it, that is usually making somebody's life better after everything is said and done. And that's really why, the importance of DePIN is out there. And the reason why I think people are adopting it so quickly is because they can understand it.
I want to talk a little bit more about the investment piece. You focus on DePIN at Borderless Capital. Talk to me about some of the most, exciting use cases for DePIN for you as an investor. What are you seeing out there, and what's kind of piquing your interest?
Exciting projects. Well, one of my favorites right now is a company called Mawari. They started in Japan several years ago, and they've essentially created a way, and I'm going to try to simplify this the best I can. They've created an engine that allows you to, say, take extended reality or augmented reality data, but they can render that information in a distributed node on the edge of the internet, and it can actually stream back to your device and use very, very little bandwidth, and actually enable extended reality on smaller devices, or less computation on smaller devices. The reason why this is exciting for me is I don't know if you play video games ever, Jen.
I do.
But you ever play a game and like something freezes up on the, when you're trying to do it, and usually a lot of the reason why is because you're waiting on there's a lag from a host somewhere on the internet, and the game just freezes because the frames can't continue on. And Mawari can render content from the internet and then merge it into something maybe like a video game, where the world, or the three-dimensional world, is still happening in the background, and then the content is lazily rendered from a GPU. That for me is really exciting because it opens the doors for having small devices. Like I don't want to have a giant Apple Vision on my head and a backpack full of batteries walking down the street, right? I've seen videos of this, and it's absurd. But what I think will happen is companies like Mawari will be able to render this content on the server side and stream this into devices, just like we stream music to our phones, or just like we stream videos. But instead, it will be little tidbits of extended reality and augmented reality data. Going back to my Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lunchbox here, I have my little. I have one of my favorite devices right now is it's a ring called the Kudus ring. It's kind of like the Aura ring. I don't know if you've seen the Aura ring.
Yep.
Where it tracks your fitness and your health data. But this one also has a built-in fidget spinner, so you can spin the middle of its ceramic. And what this is it's a chain-enabled ring. So for sharing your health data, you get rewarded for your health data. And it's on the Solana blockchain, or it's going to be on the Solana blockchain. They actually haven't launched the token yet. But one of the most exciting things for me, and you got the part of your question, is what excites me for the future. And here's what I say: is the old adage when you talk about Facebook, people say, Facebook's not a product; you're Facebook's product, right? And what I see in the future is I see products coming out that if they're going to treat human beings like products or use their data, humans will be incentivized for sharing that information. And I think that will be a very big part of DePIN. And it all could start with something as simple as this little ring. And it can also work in extended reality. It can also work with distributed telephone networks. And one other company that's of interest is a company called Wingbits. So do you ever, when you're traveling, do you ever use like flight radar?
I do. Yep.
So Wingbits is very similar to flight radar, except you're rewarded for running the little ADS-B capture devices. And so imagine, I think if you use flight radar, you get like a free membership to their premium version if you send them the data for free from your ADS-B capture device. Wingbits, you can essentially get rewarded for sharing that data because there are people out there that demand this data, that they need it, and they'll pay for it. And so in return for joining the Wingbits network, you actually get a piece of the rewards and the money for that just by participating. And those are, again, the projects where these businesses are built on the backs of people. I think that there's going to be a paradigm shift, and these businesses are going to allow people to participate, and those people will be rewarded for it. And I think that's what's being disrupted right now.
I really like that you brought that up. That narrative of owning your data, taking back ownership over what you've previously given away in Web 2 is really a broader Web 3 narrative. It sounds like you're saying DePIN is something that can help make this a reality in collaboration with Web 3 and these physical devices. I want to hear a little bit more from you, though, about the incentives, because in Web 3, we've seen communities form, but it's been really hard to incentivize people to do the things that you want them to do. Like it's the theory is good, but in practice, I don't quite think that Web3 has figured it out yet. Do you think it's the same when it comes to the taking ownership back over your data? Or do people really care? Do they want to do the thing to get paid to share their data? Or is there a mind shift that needs to happen?
So I think it's more than that, right? The offering has to be compelling as well. So if you create a compelling offering, you maybe or potentially enable more privacy, or you reward people for sharing their data. I think it's a combination of those mechanisms that will allow people to take back. But the end result has to be positive, and it has to be useful to the consumer. For instance, we were talking, several of us were talking earlier, and we said, just giving somebody a better price for something doesn't mean they're going to, leave Verizon for something like Helium Mobile. The offering has to be better. The service has to be better. And on top of that, it should probably have a better price. And I think when you start to mix those combinations of things, and then you actually add demand to it as well, the demand is what will also get people excited, because the more demand there is for something like this, and the more that we tap into the demand side of building DePIN or Web3 projects, means the more money or the more incentive is going to be generated. And I still think on all of Web3, we're in the early days of really tapping into the demand side of these types of things. The thing that I like the most about DePIN is the demand is a fairly simple concept to rationalize. But I also think as investors, and I'll put my investor hat on, is the whole supply part of DePIN as a whole, like users, buying devices or running commodity DePIN, is less interesting in the beginning now than it is for if the user or not the user, but the startup understands the demand of their product first, and then the supply is just going to happen automatically. And for me, I'm not the smartest guy in the world. I'm not like some wizard scientist. I can understand these concepts and the demand and supply concepts of DePIN projects much more than I could if I got into smart contracts or doing all these complex things in the Web3 world. And so for me, it's really about that understanding. If that makes sense.
What still needs to be solved for this DePIN future we've been talking about to be enabled? What are the challenges that still don't quite have a solution?
Yeah, so I think one of the big things is we have to start thinking about personally identifiable information, right? With all of the rules that were passed in Europe for people's privacy, if we're starting to build complex systems in DePIN, like content delivery networks or GPU networks, search systems, we have to start thinking with the focus on privacy, and mainly because somebody that's hosting a node, for instance, right? Say it's a search node for some type of application. If there's something personal in there and it gets stored on somebody, it automatically violates like every rule on GDPR. So we have to start thinking about how we're going to maintain people's privacy all the way through. So if you're creating, this is a public message I'll say, right? Is like, if you're creating a content delivery network, for DePIN and you're going to launch that product, this is something you have to think about. You also have to think about not only that the content delivery network works, but that you can track the usage of that data that's going through a distributed content delivery network. And that's another thing is being able to gather metrics and instrument that and understand that is going to be vital to anything. And really, I think when we start to solve those pieces, and maybe some of the obscure governmental policies, I think DePIN is going to catch on even harder. And what I would say is, if there's anybody out there that's, for instance, looking at oblivious HTTP, for instance, like I'm going to build a content delivery network, and I know there's a new RFC for the internet for oblivious HTTP. Like I would be extremely apt to seeing somebody building something on oblivious HTTP, just because I know I'm not going to be responsible for the data passing through the DePIN network. And that's what people like me is what I'm thinking about. But I also look at things from a very technical perspective in some cases.
When we talk about privacy and we talk about privacy in the context of DePIN, is this something that you think can be solved? And the reason I ask you this is privacy has been a growing concern for people. It's not something that has been solved. Of course, we have the GDPR in Europe. We have policy that addresses privacy, but it hasn't really done anything. People's information gets leaked all the time. Is this something that can be addressed? And is it maybe a Web3 technology that can solve it, like zero knowledge?
Yes. So I think there are maybe some pieces of ZK systems can solve these problems. But one of the things to think about is even many parts of Web3 and blockchain land, they still rely on something that has been around since day one, HTTP, right? The HTTP protocol that we browse the internet with every day was not designed for security. And oddly enough, and when I mentioned oblivious HTTP, this RFC is starting to model security in HTTP, where security is a first practice. So imagine, you ever think about, I don't know if you use Android or an iPhone, but when I'm in here and I'm sending an iMessage, right? The moment that message leaves my phone and say I text you, that message is encrypted from my phone, or from your public key is pulled, from a network, encrypted on my phone, and then sent to you, and then you can decrypt that message. And a lot of what's happening with things like oblivious HTTP is those practices are starting to happen now. But of course, they're not even fully approved RFCs. But when these mechanisms start to happen and they become mainstream, it will be much, much simpler to have that security first approach where people's data is protected when it passes through or is utilized on the network, because only the owner of the data is going to be able to decrypt it. And so I think, in my extremely long-winded answer, as we progress to a security first society, I think it will get easier to be able to accomplish that.
All right. And Sean, I want to get inside your brain as we wrap up here. How long is it going to take for us to achieve this society that we've been talking about, that's security first, enabled by DePIN? When does this future that we're talking about come to fruition for mainstream people?
It's a really good question. I could make up an answer, right? But I really think it's going to depend on. I'll go back to the paper. It's limited by our creativity, right? And the more people out there. And so, for instance, these are all the oblivious HTTP. Those are all Web 2 people coming up with these concepts, but they're going to apply to Web 3. The more advanced we get in those realms, the faster it's going to happen. Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Will we see self-driving cars first, fully autonomous? I don't know. But I think every 2 to 3 years, I think you will see an approach where it gets better and better. And when it's there, when it's over the finish line, I'll say 10 years. Maybe that's super overly or under optimistic. I don't know, but that's the number in my head that I like.
Sean, thank you so much for joining the show. And for anyone who wants to read Sean's article, that's live now on CoinDesk.com.